Hi folks, I'm Josh and I'm here to talk about Clans of Caledonia and the recently released Industria expansion. So the original Clans of Caledonia was released in, I believe, 2017, designed by, I'm going to probably butcher this, Juma Al-Juju. It was a pretty critically acclaimed game at the time, maybe a little bit of a sleeper hit, not like super well known. It's in sort of a similar sort of family of games as games like Terra Mystica, Gaia Project, the newer Age of Innovation. This was actually the first game of that series that I played, and I absolutely loved it. It's always been one of my favorite games for many, many years. And they recently released the Industria expansion, which kind of revitalizes the game in some really interesting ways. So when this was originally released, it was kind of a sort of a sharper, more dynamic take on the sort of classic economic strategy game formula. And as mentioned, it was compared a lot with games like Terra Mystica quite favorably. But it does some things that are pretty unique in the field. It does a bit more with markets than those games did. I'll talk about what the core game loop is a little bit, and I'll describe how I feel about it. I'm not going to do like a full comprehensive rules teach. It's a fairly meaty game, but I'll give an overview of how the gameplay flows. And then I'll talk a bit about how I feel about it, as well as the new expansion. So what you're going to be doing in this game is you're going to be putting pieces from your player board here out onto this map. And you're going to pay to do so. So you'll pay the cost of the actual piece that you put out, and you'll pay the cost of the space on the map that you're putting it onto. And when you do that, you will be uncovering spaces on your board. And that means that at the end of that round, all uncovered spaces on your board will produce whatever is written on them. So if you put sheep out on the board, then you will produce wool. If you put wheat fields out, you will produce wheat. If you have wheat, you can turn it into bread or whiskey. If you have woodcutters or miners out on the board, you'll produce money, which is pretty important. Money drives all your actions in the game, so typically you're going to try to get that number up pretty high if you can. There's also ways to upgrade, so you can upgrade how much you can travel along the board. So typically you can only place in areas that are adjacent to you. However, you are able to upgrade how far you can travel across larger bodies of water like this, and also you're able to just cross these smaller locks as well. So you can place either adjacent, or if you're able to travel across water, you can place sort of across water. So the map is quite restrictive in terms of what you are able to place. Like you can't place on water. As mentioned, you can only place in areas that you can reach or that are adjacent to you. It's quite a tight board. People are going to be vying for position on this board, trying to get to the areas that are cheaper. Also, you want to try to be reaching these sort of four corner tiles here, which give you bonus actions that are typically quite powerful. So it's usually quite important. Like when I'm playing, I try to get to all four locations throughout the game if I can. So it's going to be a bit of a tight battle to get to those locations, typically. At two players, they sort of shade out the outside region here of the map. It's not the most intuitive or easy to tell that they've done this. So what we'll often do in two-player games, I actually removed these before to show what this looks like, but we'll often do like this with the excess clan tiles. We'll sort of put them around the outside to just kind of more clearly block off those regions. Because yeah, as you can see, it's not the easiest to tell what areas are accessible or not in a two-player game. It's possible, but it's just not the best sort of interface. So not only will you be engaging with the map itself here, you will also be engaging with the market. So as you play this game, one of the core things you're going to be trying to do is fulfill these contracts. So these contracts consist of a cost on the left and then kind of a reward on the right. So the cost is made up of the resources that you produce, and in some cases there's also meat as a cost, so either beef or lamb. And if you're paying that cost, you just simply remove either a sheep or a cow from the board to pay that cost and put it back on your personal board. And then they also consist of these components that you'll be producing, these resources you'll be producing throughout the game. And then they'll provide you a reward as well. So in this case, I get 3 bamboo and an upgrade and 10 coins. So the rewards typically consist of what I think they're called imported resources, and then upgrades or money What the imported resources represent is effectively just points. So at the end of the game, you're going to count out all these imported resources that you have. Hops are always worth just a point each for your completed contracts. Imported resources are worth a different amount of points depending on what is the most common. So as you complete contracts, you'll be increasing the amount of imported resources on this board, increasing it. So like if I get 3 tobacco, I'll increase the tobacco marker by 3. And now there's 19 tobacco across all players in their completed contracts. So at the end of the game, you'll count up points based on these completed resources. So whatever the lowest amount of imported resources is worth 5 points. So like the rarer the resource is, the more it's worth. And then whatever the most amount is worth 3 points, and then the middle is 4. So it's quite a cool little dynamic trying to get the resources that are worth a lot more money, or sorry, a lot more points at the end of the game. And you can kind of mess with players in interesting ways. Like if someone's really over-indexing a lot on tobacco, you might buy another tobacco to just sort of push it over the edge and make it a lot more common and bring the point value down of that tobacco for that player. It doesn't come into play too much, but you can do interesting things like that, which is pretty fun. And then upgrades themselves represent this bottom row on your board. So you might upgrade your, at the start of the game, your woodsman or your woodcutters are worth 4 coins each. So they give you 4 coins in the production round, but you can upgrade this, and now they're worth 6 coins each. You can upgrade your distance that you can travel, which I mentioned earlier what that means, and you can also upgrade your merchants so you can get more merchants, which takes me on to another aspect of this game, which was quite new and different at the time. And one of my favorite parts of this game is the sort of evolving market over here. So this market represents all the different resources in the game, from wool through to whiskey, and their current value. So at any point for your turn, you can send these merchants, which are these cubes that you'll get. You start with 2 and you can get more by upgrading. You'll send these merchants onto the board to either buy or sell resources. So let's say I had a merchant here and then I send this merchant and I'm going to, let's say, sell this bread. I would put the merchant in the sell area for bread and I would get rid of this bread, and this bread is worth 11. So I would take 11 coins and then I would drop the value of the bread down by the amount that I sold. So let's say if I sold 3 bread, then I would get 33 coins, and then I would drop the value of bread down 3 down to 8. So now bread is cheaper to buy if another player wants to buy, and you can't yourself buy and sell the same resource in the same round. And at the end of the round, in addition to taking income, you'll also take all your merchants off the board so that you can use them next round. So I love this market dynamic. It's really, really cool, and you will be using it quite frequently throughout the game if you're playing well, trying to sort of exploit the market. You might not produce all the resources you need. You typically won't produce all the resources you need to get these contracts fulfilled, especially the better ones. So you will need to use the market to get the resources that you lack. I really love this element of the game. It can result in a lot of really interesting plays. So that's kind of the fundamentals of the game. Is you're going to be playing, you're going to be getting points. You also get points for resources and for money that's left over. Every round, when you get to the end of the round, there's these little glory tokens or shields. So there are 5 rounds in the game, and at the end of each round, you will score based on these shields. So like, let's say we were in the second round. At the end of this round, for every different type of resource you have, you'll get 3 points. And then at the end of that round, you will flip the shield over, and then the next round is variable scoring. So if you've played Terra Mystica or Gaia Project or Age of Innovation, you'll be very familiar with that type of scoring mechanism where it's going to be different. You'll score for different things every round. And it's something that you shouldn't necessarily overemphasize and overfocus on, but it's worth paying attention to, as you can get quite a few points that way. So you'll play through to the end of the round, and you'll collect your points, and then you'll move on to the next round. And like I said, there's 5 rounds in the game. So that's just a super, super high-level summary of the game. An important aspect as well is there are these clans. Now, this is an expansion clan. There are quite a few of them now. I think they might have doubled the amount of clans with the expansion, which is great. There was already a good amount of variety in them. The clans changed the game quite a bit. So for example, Clan Gordon here, which is me. For Clan Gordon, I am able to produce not just 2 grain, but 3 grain every time I have a grain field out. So with my 2 grain fields in the board, I'm actually producing 6 grain, not just 4. And grain is cheaper for me to actually build, so it costs me 15, not 18. And when I produce grain, I can actually put that produced grain onto these little silos here. And then I can, throughout the game, throughout the round, I can take grain off silos to gain a little benefit of an action underneath it. So I can make an area free to build in, like no terrain cost. I can get an upgrade for free, or I can produce a milk or a wool, which is very, very cool. So it's a nice little twist, this clan, and it makes grain an interesting alternative strategy to pursue, and I'll do different things with it, but I also make more of it. And then Clan Sinclair, we played a 2-player game yesterday evening, which is why the board is quite set up already. So Clan Sinclair over here, they aren't able to actually upgrade their travel at all. They start with the travel of effectively, they can just travel over locks. And if they want, but they're able to skip terrain. So they're effectively the train building clan. They can skip terrain by paying 2 coins to skip. And they can also skip over water by paying 2 coins for every water space they skip over. So they get pretty, they can span pretty great distances. And they're very well set up for one of the main end game scoring mechanisms, which is, I won't explain exactly how this works because it's one of the less intuitive parts of the game, but you basically score for the amount of different but connected settlements you have on the board at the end of the game. Sinclair is very, very good at that because they will have a lot of opportunity to have a person here and then skip a space and have a person here and then skip a space and have a person here. And that'll mean they already have like 3 settlements on the board. So they're really, really good at that, but there's a lot of early game cost that will go into spanning those distances by paying to travel. And there's a lot of other clans in the box that do lots of different things. Like one of them, for example, gives you another space to store your contracts. Like when you get a contract, you have to keep that contract before you can, and you have to complete it before you can get another one. There's a clan that just gives you a whole other space for a second contract, which is cool. So there are a ton of clans in the game, and they change the game pretty dramatically, and typically you'll want to try to exploit your clan abilities to do well. So yeah, that's sort of the core loop of the game. With the market as the heartbeat, this board is sort of the main area that you'll be focusing on, and then over here you're going to be looking at what you're scoring and what the upcoming contracts are. So variable clans means very high asymmetry, which is really cool. Like it's such a tiny little piece here. This little bit of cardboard just changes the way that you play so dramatically, which I love. And they've exploited it very well in Industria by just making a bunch more of them that just fit the game really, really well. I think the Industria clans are a little bit more complex as well, which is good. A lot of the base game ones were fairly straightforward. So yeah, the base game alone has a relatively compact footprint, believe it or not. So it actually came in like a box about half the size originally, but it was cram-packed filled with stuff. I will admit the pieces are a bit smaller than I would like. That can be a little bit fiddly, and I should really try to find some dual layer boards for this, or maybe like a 3D sort of insert or a sort of cover to go on it to help the pieces, because they can get bumped around a bit, which is a bit of a pain. But yeah, very compact game generally with really, really deep decisions, right in that sort of Terra Mystica Gaia project sort of area, which I love. Industria adds quite a bit. So it adds some simple stuff, like I mentioned, it adds new clans, which is great. It adds a bunch of other things that are cool as well. So like even there's one very simple thing, which is just a really, really simple little twist that it adds, and it uses base game components, which is cool. So like, and you can house rule this if you only own the original, where for every market space on the board, you roll these dice. You actually just roll this dice. You go across them from left to right one at a time, and if it's +2, then you increase the value at the start of the game by 1, and if it's -2, you decrease it by 1, or something to that effect. So ultimately what you'll end up is with the market board being different at the start of the game every time, which is really cool. Just a small little twist that it adds as part of the rules. The other stuff that it adds, one of my favorite things actually this adds, I adore this. So one of the big problems with base clans of Caledonia is contracts would come out onto this board here, and they would be quite random, and you wouldn't know what was coming. And also there was an ability that you can activate at certain times to like draw 3 contracts from the draw pile, and then just take one of them. That which would be very, very random, and it felt like there's a lot of, you're subject to luck quite a lot for that. This adds this little forecast contract board up the top here. You can't quite see it actually in that shot. I'll just bring it over this way a little bit. But this board is pretty amazing and very, very simple. So all it does is it gives you a view of what the contracts that are coming up are. So like these first 3 contracts, if you were to draw 3 contracts off the contract pile and choose one, instead you choose one of these first 3. Unless you're Clan Buchanan, you can choose one of the first 6 because they're a bit better at that. And as contracts re-enter the contract supply here, which is where you can take them from through normal, like I take a contract actions, you will take them from left to right and put them on here. So this lets you see what is coming up. This changes the game so much and completely solves one of the biggest problems I had with base Caledonia, which is that luck of the draw of contracts. Like a lot of the time it'd be towards the end of the round and all the spaces were empty for contracts, and some new ones were going to come out, and you're like, I don't even know what the new ones are going to be. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? I don't know. Now you can see what's going to come out next round when these slots refill, and you can make your decisions based on that. Like I need to be the starting player next round because there's a contract that I really care about coming out. So it adds a lot of interesting decision space to the game that really wasn't there before in the same way with that contract supply. I adore this change. It is a brilliant example of a really, really simple change, and you can easily house rule it as well. So like if you only have the base game, you can just play with this approach. I think probably some people are doing that already, and maybe people were doing that even before the expansion came out. Wouldn't be surprised if someone invented this concept. But yeah, that is amazing. Absolutely love that. Some of the other things, it also adds these little farmers markets, which are pretty cool. So I think you add like maybe 1 per player or something to the board. And this just represents another way to sort of sell goods. So it has 2 resources on it. And when you put a thing next to a farmer's market, you can then choose to sell resources to the farmer's market. And then you put the resource on here to indicate that you've already sold this one, so it can't be sold milk again. And you will get the value of that resource. You will still have to use merchants, but you'll get the value of that resource +2 if it's a basic resource, or +3 if it's a produced resource, which is really cool. It's just like a nice little way to get to change up how you get income throughout the game, and to add a little bit more interesting decisions to positioning on this board. It does also decrease the amount you get at every round, so it actually decreases it a fair amount. So it tightens up the money, but it adds some more interesting positional play. I'm not sure I would always play at the farmer's market with new players because the players decide where to put them at the start, and if you don't know how clans works, that can be a tricky decision. You're like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing here. But once you know the game really well, I would always play with the farmer's market. And the biggest change this adds, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is this train board here. So this, it seems quite a lot. It's like the biggest component apart from the main map. It's not as overwhelming as it first seems, and it adds some really interesting decisions to the game. I'm not sure I would always play with it, but when I first saw it, I was like, I'm not going to enjoy this. And when I played it, I enjoyed it actually a lot more than I expected. And actually, I would usually play with this board with more experienced players. But how it's effectively going to work is you have these trains that represent your that you can use on this board, and you will move these trains around on this board. Every round, you can move your trains once. In order to do so, you have to be able to fill the demand on the spot you're moving to. So let's say I'm here in Dumfries, and you can move 1 or 2 spaces. And if you move through someone's train, then you have to pay 3 coins, I believe, to do so. So there's a bit of blocking on this board as well. But let's say I want to go to Kilmarnock, so I will go 1, 2 to Kilmarnock, and in order to do that, I must give up a whiskey, wool, and a milk. If I do that, then I get the bonus on this tile here. And in this case, the bonus is I can take a piece from my board and put it 2 spaces away from any of my pieces on the board, and I pay no cost for the piece itself, which is a pretty big deal. I think you still pay the location cost, but you don't pay the cost for the piece, which can be quite high. Now you can't do it on wheat, which makes sense because it's 18 cost versus 8s and 9s and 10s for everything else. But it's quite a big deal, and you also get a free upgrade with that, so that's quite cool. And then once you do that, in the round that you've done it, you take the leftmost sort of this piece off of this board, and you put it in front of you, and now you have this piece which you can do something with later, which I'll explain. You can see there are locked spaces on the board. In order to cross those locked spaces, you need to have one of these little pieces on the board in one of these spots that you can see here. So these are kind of the unlock spots. Now, if you're colorblind, I'm not sure this is going to be very friendly for you. I don't know if these colors are colorblind friendly. They might be. But essentially, there's like a red lock, there's a green lock, a purple lock, and a blue lock. If you have one of these pieces to put down, and if you put yours down first, you get 6 points. Second, you get 2. And I believe that this is the 2-player side. The other side, 3 and 4 players, will look quite different. But you can put these pieces down to unlock these sort of blocked tracks. So if I have completed 2 contracts with 3 or more hops on them, then, which I haven't done, but let's say that I had done that, then I could put my little piece here. When I collect it, I can put it on the board there, and now I've unlocked those tracks. So now I can use those tracks. So now I can go to that city, which is cool, and get the bonuses there. So yeah, you're going to be going around and doing these things. You can see all these tiles are quite different in the effects that they have. I'm not sure if you can really read them very well with this camera, but they're all quite different in the effects that they have, like dramatically different. And they all have a sort of a similar sort of pattern of goods that you have to pay to do them. So there's typically there's going to be a produced resource and then a couple basic resources, or there's going to be like 4, I believe, basic resources or 2 produced resources, which is awesome because for basic resources, the only thing you can really do with them in the base game, apart from turn them into produced resources, is sell them, because none of the contracts take simple resources except wool. So if you have an abundance of wheat or an abundance of milk and no cheese or whatever to turn it into, this gives you a lot of options for what you can do with those pieces. It's interesting, this expansion reminds me a lot of, if you've played Terraforming Mars, the Colonies expansion in Terraforming Mars, where it doesn't add as much complexity as you might think it does, but it gives you a lot more interesting ways to sort of manipulate your resources and exchange them into different resources. So it gives you a lot more flexibility and freedom. Now, if you don't want that flexibility, this might not be the expansion for you. And I also think there's an element here where if one player is going and focusing on this board quite a bit, it kind of means everyone, I think, is kind of forced to also focus on this board, because there are quite a lot of points up for grabs on here. So like if you manage to do a delivery in every round of the game, that's worth 20 points at the end of the game. Plus, you will have a lot of these sort of tombstone-shaped pieces that you can use to place on these spots, which is also going to be worth quite a few points at the end of the game. So like the other player in our 2-player game scored 40 points on this board alone, and I wasn't focusing on it nearly as much, so I only ended up scoring something like 16. So it was like, 2, 4, 10. I scored 19 points, and I didn't focus on it quite as much as he did. And he also got a lot of advantages from this board, in that he was getting a lot of like extra money and resource production and conversion and stuff like that. So I think this is really, really cool, and it adds a nice twist to the game. As I've said, it's not as impactful as you might think. Like, it doesn't fundamentally change how the game works, despite the large footprint of this expansion board. But it does give you a lot of really interesting extra decisions to make on the side, and I don't think it detracts from the experience at all, because it is actually entirely optional. You can just choose to not engage with it if you want. And one last thing as well is, as at the end of the round, you're going to be removing these. Any that were delivered, you'll remove. So let's say I delivered to Kilmarnock. This would get removed, and then it would get replaced with a new tile. So these the actual things you're delivering are going to change every round when they are delivered. But yeah, really, really clever expansion. I like it quite a lot. So components and presentation for this game. As I mentioned at the start, the pieces are a bit small for what they probably should be. The fact there's no dual layer boards is a bit of a pain, and I think I will be seeking them out. And the reason I'll be seeking them out is I love this game. So my experience with these games started with Clans of Caledonia, and then I actually kind of skipped Terra Mystica. I've played it, but I never really got that into it, and went to Gaia Project. And Gaia Project was my favorite game for a very long time. And then Age of Innovation came out and kind of replaced Gaia Project for me. I adore Age of Innovation. I think it's incredible. And then Gaia Project's expansion, The Lost Fleet, came out. And then Gaia Project was kind of back on top again because I think Lost Fleet is a masterpiece. Industria, I wouldn't say that Clans of Caledonia with Industria quite gets to the same heights as Gaia Project, or maybe even Age of Innovation, but it's doing a different thing. It's, again, a lot of similarities, but it feels cozier. It's a bit more relaxing to play than those games. And the market dynamic is really cool, and nothing like this quite exists in those games. And I love the contract fulfillment that you're doing in here. You're not doing anything like that in those games. Those games, you're mainly just focused on scoring the round end points and the game end points as well. One more thing I should mention Industria adds as well is it adds an additional randomized game end scoring. So in this case, the most settlements next to locks. And there's quite a few of those in the box. They just give you some additional end-game scoring, which is just nice and another thing to sort of aim for. But yeah, so those other games really focus on that end-of-round scoring. And that's kind of where the game is played. This has a lot more involvement when it comes to the sort of the contracts that you're fulfilling and the resources you're producing. It feels like you're doing more stuff. Now, again, I don't know if it quite gets to the same heights as those games for me, but it does have that different feel, and I really, really adore it. So I hadn't played it for quite a while, and then Industria arrived, and I've now played it, and I think I'm going to be playing this quite a bit. I think it's going to be in our regular rotation. Not sure I'll always play with this board in particular, although if people are interested, then I will. But that market, that sort of contract, that view of contracts coming up, amazing. The new clans are awesome. Yeah, the farmers market's a nice twist. And I just really, really appreciate what Juma has done here with this expansion. It's not often that you see an expansion come along for an 8-year-old game and just completely revitalize it in such an awesome way. But this adds so much variability. The other thing I should add as well, the base game came with 16 different map configurations. This adds, I think, 4 more map tiles that are a little bit different, but they play mostly the same. And that means that there's now, I think, 256 combinations of maps. Now, that sounds like, well, 16 is already so many. I had actually played, I believe, every configuration. We tracked the configurations you were playing with. I think I've played every configuration of the base game. So I kind of love that now I'm pretty much always guaranteed to play something different. And I think that's really, really cool as well. So yeah, absolutely lovely game. Yes, components are a bit too small and fiddly, but everything else about this is basically perfect. And Industria, it doesn't reinvent the wheel with this. It doesn't massively, dramatically change the whole game, but it refines it. It really, really refines it, and it makes it sort of a, depending on what you want, either a sharper experience or a little bit more sandboxy, and you get a little bit more freedom in the resources. So you can take the bits that you like and leave the bits that you don't. And yes, it really keeps the charm of Clans of Caledonia alive and just fixes up some of the rough edges, like that contract issue that I mentioned. So yeah, Clans of Caledonia was great. Industria makes it sing. I am a big fan of this expansion. I will always include parts of this expansion for sure, and this has brought Clans of Caledonia back to the table for me, which I'm very grateful for, because, as I've said, it was one of my favorites back in the day, and I think it's going to be back on that list again after this expansion. So well done, Juma. Great expansion here. And if you get a chance to play it, I highly, highly recommend it. That's Clans of Caledonia with Industria.